The champagne glass was still warm from my hand when I heard her say it. She won't even notice the accounts are gone. She barely notices anything anymore. I stood frozen behind the pantry door, my fingers pressing so hard into the door frame that the wood left a groove in my palm I'd feel for hours. Through the crack, I could see my daughter-in-law's manicured hand resting on my son's arm, her wedding ring catching the kitchen light. "Are you sure she signed it?" my son asked, and his voice, the voice I used to hum lullabies into when he was 3 years old, had a coldness in it I didn't recognize. "She signs whatever we put in front of her," she said. "That's the beauty of it." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened to my son laugh. "My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I'm 68 years old, and for 31 years I ran a mid-sized architectural firm out of a converted warehouse in Portland, Oregon, Whitfield and Associates, that my late husband, Robert, and I built from a single drafting table and a $4,000 loan from his father in 1993. By the time Robert passed away 4 years ago, the firm was worth $6.2 million, and between the business, our house, and his life insurance, I inherited a total estate of just over $9.8 million. I never told anyone the real number. Not my neighbors, not my church group, and, critically, not my son, David, or his new wife, Priya, who I'd watched him marry 8 months earlier in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses. I love my son. I still do. In the complicated way you love someone you helped raise into a person you no longer fully recognize. But on the night of his wedding reception, standing behind that pantry door with a glass of champagne going flat in my hand, I learned that David and Priya believed I was worth exactly $9.8 million to them, and that they had already started planning how to make it theirs. The wedding had been beautiful, in the exhausting, overproduced way modern weddings are. Priya wore a $12,000 gown from a designer whose name I couldn't pronounce. David wore his father's cufflinks, which had touched me more than I expected, until I found out later that Priya had insisted on it because it played well for the photos. Very sentimental, very old money. At the reception, I'd worn a simple navy dress and Robert's wedding ring on a chain around my neck, the way I always did on important days. I remember Priya's mother leaning toward another guest at our table, not lowering her voice nearly as much as she thought she had, and saying, "Is that the mother-in-law? I heard she still works." At her age. It's a little sad, honestly. I smiled and said nothing. I had learned, over 4 years of widowhood, that silence often told me more than confrontation ever could. It was an hour later, slipping away from the dance floor to find a bathroom, that I passed the kitchen pantry and heard my son's voice through the gap in the door, and the conversation that would end, 11 months later, with me standing in a courtroom holding a folder that changed everything. The Monday after the wedding, I drove to my lawyer's office, not the family lawyer David knew, but a private estate attorney named Marcus Chin I'd hired quietly the year before, after a strange feeling I couldn't name. I asked Marcus to pull every document I'd signed in the past 6 months. Buried in a stack of routine business updates David had brought over for my signature, always with coffee, always with a hug, always with the words, "Just formalities, Mom," was a durable power of attorney granting David full financial authority over my estate the moment 2 physicians certified any decline in cognitive function. Attached to it was a beneficiary change form for Robert's life insurance policy, redirecting the remaining $1.4 million from the Whitfield and Associates Employee Trust, money I had earmarked for my longtime staff, directly into a joint account under David and Priya's names. I had signed both. I hadn't read either. I called David and asked, gently, almost apologetically, whether he could explain the power of attorney form. I told him I was getting a little confused about the paperwork, the first note in a performance I hadn't yet realized I was beginning. "Mom, it's totally standard," David said, his voice smooth as a sales pitch. "It's an elder protection instrument. Priya's father is a wealth manager, and he said with estates over a certain threshold, you basically have to have contingency structures in place, or the state can freeze everything if something happens to you. It's boilerplate. Everyone with money does this." It was, I would later confirm with Marcus, almost entirely fabricated. "Oh," I said, "that makes sense. You're so good with this financial stuff, sweetheart. I never understood it the way your father did." I thanked him. I told him I felt silly for worrying. I hung up the phone and sat very still in my kitchen for 11 minutes, the way I used to sit still after Robert's diagnosis, gathering myself before I let a single feeling out. Marcus and I spent the next 6 weeks quietly tracing the money. Nothing dramatic, no locked room drama, just patient forensic accounting. What we found was worse than a single beneficiary change. David and Priya had opened 3 LLCs in the past year: Whitfield Legacy Holdings, Cascade Property Partners, and a third registered in Priya's maiden name alone, Kapoor Consulting Group. Whitfield and Associates, my company, the one Robert and I built with our hands, had been quietly billing over $340,000 in consulting fees to Kapoor Consulting Group over the previous 10 months, money that funneled straight into Priya's personal account. David, as the firm's newly appointed Chief Operating Officer, a title I hadn't approved, given to him by an HR director he'd personally hired 6 months earlier, had signed off on every invoice. The final piece came from something I wasn't even looking for. I'd stopped by the office unannounced to drop off cookies for the staff, an old habit Robert used to tease me about, and I heard David and Priya through his half-open office door, laughing. "She thinks the trust fund thing was her idea," Priya said, delighted. I basically wrote the whole memo and just told her it protects the employees. She got teary. It was almost too easy. "She's not going to last much longer running that place anyway," David said. "Once we get her declared, the board transitions to me automatically. Chin doesn't even need to be involved." I stood in the hallway holding a plate of oatmeal cookies, and for the first time in 11 months, I let myself feel exactly how much it hurt. Then I put the plate down on the reception desk, told the receptionist they were for everyone, and walked out before either of them saw me. That night, I made a decision, and I made it with the same clarity Robert used to bring to a difficult blueprint. Strip away everything unnecessary and build only what holds weight. I decided to become exactly the woman they already believed I was. I started small. I began repeating stories at Sunday dinners. The same anecdote about the 1998 office flood, told twice in one conversation. I let my hands tremble slightly when I reached for my water glass, a small, deliberate unsteadiness I practiced in the bathroom mirror until it looked natural. I bought a cane I didn't need and leaned on it for my hip. I let Priya help me read documents, squinting at the print and saying, "The words just swim. Dear, you read it to me." Inside, I was sharper than I had been in years. Every performance was a data-gathering mission. Every confused blink was a chance to watch what they said when they thought my guard was down. I told myself, the way I used to tell junior architects staring down an impossible deadline, "You don't win by being louder. You win by being underestimated for exactly as long as you need to be." Marcus thought I was reckless. "Eleanor, you're handing them rope." "I'm not handing them rope," I told him. "I'm handing them enough rope to see exactly how they intend to use it." 6 weeks later, I asked David and Priya to dinner at my house, a rare invitation since I'd been too tired to host in months. I told David, in a small, wavering voice, that I wanted to talk about simplifying things and that Marcus had drawn up the new arrangement for me to sign. I said I trusted David to handle it and didn't need to fully understand it anymore. What I actually had Marcus draw up was a single-page document with one real clause buried in dense legal boilerplate. A full, notarized confession disguised as an estate simplification consent, which, if signed without being read carefully, exactly the way David and Priya signed everything I gave them, would legally authorize an independent financial audit of Whitfield and Associates, Kapoor Consulting Group, and the joint account, triggered the moment it was countersigned. I also asked Marcus to be present, introduced simply as my old friend from the Historical Society, and I placed my phone on the table between the breadbasket and the water pitcher, screen dark, recording app running, the microphone angled toward their end of the table. I felt it buzz once around 6:40 p.m., a text from Marcus's assistant confirming the auditor was on standby. I didn't look down. I just refilled David's wine. Dinner started warmly. It curdled fast. I hadn't planned for an audience beyond the 4 of us, but Priya, ever the planner, had invited her parents to make it a real family dinner, and David had invited his cousin Ashley, who filmed everything for her lifestyle page. a detail that would matter more than any of us knew that night. "Mom, you're looking a little pale," David said, in a tone performed for the table rather than meant for me. "Are you sure you're eating enough? Priya's been so worried about you living alone." I told him, "Eleanor, you shouldn't be managing the firm's board anymore," Priya added, patting my hand like I was a nervous horse. "It's a lot for someone your age. We just want what's best." Priya's father, Anil, raised his glass. "To simplifying things. Smart woman, know when to hand over the reins." I let the moment sit. I let them believe, for exactly as long as they needed to, that the frail woman at the head of the table had already lost the thread of her own life. Then I asked David to hand me the document, and I asked him, gently, to walk me through it one more time, so I don't forget. He did. Smoothly. Confidently. He described it as just protecting you, Mom, using the phrase elder protection instrument, again, word for word, the same script from 11 months earlier. "That's interesting," I said, setting down my fork. "Because Marcus tells me an actual elder protection instrument doesn't usually come bundled with a beneficiary reassignment on Robert's life insurance policy, or with $340,000 in consulting fees paid to a company registered in your maiden name, Priya." The table went silent. Ashley's phone, still filming for her lifestyle page, kept rolling. "I don't know what you're talking about," Priya said, her voice climbing half an octave. "I do," I said quietly. I did not raise my voice once. "I have the invoices. I have the wire transfers. I have you, David, on a recording in your own office, telling Priya that once I'm declared, the board transitions to you automatically, and that Marcus doesn't even need to be involved." I looked at Marcus. Marcus is sitting right there. Marcus raised 2 fingers in a small, unbothered wave. David's face went the color of the tablecloth. "Mom, you're misunderstanding." "I'm not confused, David," I said. "I haven't been confused in 11 months. I've been patient." I reached into my cardigan pocket and took out the cane I'd been leaning on for 6 weeks. I set it flat on the table between us. Then, with both hands, I snapped it in half. It made a sharp, clean crack that silenced whatever Priya's father was about to say. "I don't need this," I said. I never did. 2 men in plain clothes who had been waiting quietly by my front door, private forensic investigators Marcus had arranged, working alongside a state elder fraud unit already reviewing the Kapoor consulting invoices, stepped into the dining room. One of them asked David and Priya to come with them to answer questions regarding the misappropriation of trust funds and fraudulent use of power of attorney. I tore the simplification consent document in half, right there on the table, and set the 2 pieces beside the broken cane. "You can keep the copy," I told David. "I have the original, notarized, and Marcus has 3 more. What followed unfolded over the next 4 months like a slow-motion collapse. David was removed as Chief Operating Officer of Whitfield and Associates within 72 hours, once the board, the Real board, the one I'd never actually ceded control of, reviewed the audit. He was later charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a charge Marcus and I ultimately agreed to have reduced in exchange for full restitution, primarily because I still could not bring myself to watch my son go to prison, whatever he'd done. Priya was not shown the same mercy by her own family. Kapoor Consulting Group was dissolved under investigation, and Priya's father, the wealth manager who had coached the elder protection instrument story, quietly resigned from his firm amid an internal compliance review once his name surfaced in the audit trail. Priya herself was charged separately for her role in the fraudulent LLC structure and is, as of this recording, awaiting trial. The $340,000 in siphoned consulting fees was fully recovered through a court-ordered asset freeze, and I redirected every dollar of it back into the Whitfield and Associates Employee Trust, the fund it was stolen from in the first place. I personally visited every one of my 41 employees, many of whom had worked for Robert and me since the 1990s, and told them their retirement funds were untouched and their jobs were secure. Our office manager, Denise, who had said nothing but had clearly suspected something for months, cried in my arms in the parking lot. David's cousin Ashley never posted the video. She sent it to me privately instead, along with a message. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry." I told her she had nothing to apologize for. It was late November, for months after the dinner, when David came to my door. It was raining hard, the kind of cold Pacific Northwest rain that gets into your bones, and he stood on my porch without an umbrella, his coat soaked through, a duffel bag at his feet. Priya had filed for divorce 2 weeks earlier. He'd been staying with a friend whose patience had apparently run out. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked in a way that, once, would have brought me straight to my knees. "I have nowhere else to go." I looked at my son standing in the rain, and for a moment I let myself remember him at 7 years old, asleep on Robert's shoulder after a long car ride. Then I looked at the porch railing, where I'd once hung the wedding decorations for his marriage to a woman who called stealing from me almost too easy. "You made your choice 11 months ago, in a kitchen, when you thought I couldn't hear you," I said. "I'm not going to unmake it for you tonight." "Mom, please. I love you," I told him, and I meant it, which was the hardest part. But love isn't the same as access. You don't have access to me anymore. I closed the door. I heard him standing there for a long moment before his footsteps finally moved off the porch. Marcus was in the kitchen when I turned around, 2 mugs of tea already made, because he'd known, the way he always seemed to know, exactly when I'd need one. "You did the right thing," he said. "I know," I said. "It just doesn't feel like winning." "It never does," he said. "It just feels like peace, eventually. Give it time." We sat at the table together, the rain still going outside, and for the first time in nearly a year, I let myself feel something close to still. Here's what I learned, and what I hope you take with you. The people who are counting on you to be too old, too tired, or too confused to notice what they're doing are almost always underestimating exactly one thing: how much you love them, and how carefully you were paying attention because of it. Love doesn't make you blind. Sometimes it's the reason you finally open your eyes. If someone in your life has ever tried to make themselves the beneficiary of your silence, I want to hear about it in the comments below. And if this story meant something to you, hit like, subscribe for more stories like this one, and let me know where you're watching from. I read every comment.